And what that means is that around the world, people are sharing together in this sacred meal. Lo que este quiere decir es que personas alrededor del mundo están celebrando esta cena sagrada. And we are one small part of that vast body of people who are celebrating communion today. Nosotros somos solamente una parte muy pequeñita de todas las personas que están celebrando comunión en este día. So in a little while, we're going to be gathering around this table right here to celebrate that sacrament of Holy Communion. And for most of us, this is not going to be anything new. Communion is, after all, a regular part of our congregation's worship life. Every first Sunday of the month, we come to this table to eat this bread that symbolizes Christ's body and drink this wine that symbolizes Christ's blood. And there is little strange for us about this. Communion is a familiar and comforting ritual, an integral part of who we are and what we do as a Christian congregation that diligently strives to follow the way of Jesus through our world. And one thing to keep in mind, particularly on this World Communion Sunday, is that children are part of our world as well. And sometimes they make noise, and sometimes they are a little bit disruptive, but Jason is still an important part of this family, and so I hope that all of us will be tolerant of Jason as he expresses his opinion to Carlos about something I don't understand. Vamos a celebrar la comunión esta mañana, el sacramento muy sagrado. Y por la mayor parte de nosotros esto no es algo nuevo. La comunión es una parte regular de la vida de adoración de esta congregación. Nosotros celebramos la comunión en el primer domingo de cada mes. Nosotros llegamos aquí para comer este pan y para beber este vino. La comunión es un rito muy cómodo para nosotros. Es una parte de quién nosotros somos y lo que nosotros hacemos como una congregación cristiana que trata de seguir el camino de Jesucristo a través de nuestro mundo. And yet I would like to suggest to us this morning that there is something distinctly different about this particular celebration of communion on World Communion Sunday. It's not that we're going to be using different symbols or following a different ritual. We'll still be eating bread and drinking grape juice. We'll still be repeating the words that Jesus spoke to his disciples on the night that he was betrayed. None of that is going to change. There's not going to be anything out of the ordinary in today's communion ritual. Innovation and creativity would hardly be the point. And yet I sincerely hope that something will change. I sincerely hope that we will approach this celebration of this sacrament with a deepened consciousness about what it means to eat the bread and drink the wine. And this difference that I seek, that I hope all of us are seeking, is not an outward change in the form of what we are saying or doing, but an inward change in the attitude and spirit with which we come to this oh so familiar and comforting ritual. Yo quiero que nosotros vamos a cambiar un poquito cuando celebramos el sacramento esta mañana. Nosotros vamos a usar los mismos símbolos que hemos usado en el pasado. Vamos a comer pan, vamos a beber el jugo de uva. Nosotros vamos a usar las mismas palabras que Jesucristo dijo cuando sus discípulos sus discípulos negaron a usted. Pero nosotros no somos interesados solamente en hacer algo muy diferente o muy creativo. No, este no es el punto de esta celebración. Ojalá que nosotros vamos a celebrar este sacramento con un consciente un poquito diferente, que nosotros vamos a comprender por qué nosotros estamos comiendo y bebiendo este pan y este vino. La diferencia es un cambio interior de nosotros y no un cambio exterior. Yo quiero que nosotros examinamos nuestras actitudes con que nosotros venimos a este sacramento. So let me start by telling the story of a little girl who one day came to the communion table with her mother. The first server handed the child a piece of bread, reminding her with a smile that Jesus loved her and that she was a child of God. Then the second server did what she was supposed to do. She extended the cup of grape juice, and that was when all heaven broke loose. To her mother's and the server's surprise, the little girl didn't do what she was expected to do. She didn't just dip the bread into the juice daintily and put it into her mouth. No, she thrust her entire hand into the cup of juice, splashing grape juice everywhere, on the table, on the floor, on her pretty dress. And then she crammed the whole piece of soggy bread into her mouth. She licked her juice-soaked fingers. She stared rapturously into her mother's face, and she shouted in a loud voice that everyone could hear, "Mommy, it's good." It's good. Yo quiero decir un cuento acerca de una niña que viene con su madre al sacramento de la comunión. Y esta niña fue servido un poquito pan. Y el otro servidor da a esta niña la copa con jugo de uva. Y la niña, en vez de poner el pan muy cuidadosamente en el jugo, pone su mano entera en la copa y jugo en toda parte, en su ropa, en la mesa, en el piso, jugo de uva en cada local. Y la niña miró a su madre y dijo, "Mamá, es bueno. Mamá, es bueno." Now we all know that grape juice that is soaked into bread is tasty, don't we? We probably wouldn't be so anxious to come to communion if it wasn't. And I have no doubt that the little girl's outburst was primarily a commentary on just how yummy the mixture of bread and grape juice actually is. But I'm going to invite us to consider another possible facet for this story. I wonder, would the bread and the grape juice have tasted so good if the little girl had not come to the table holding her mother's hand? Would she have gotten so excited about what she was eating if she had not been in the company of other people? There is something inherently good and praiseworthy about the food that we share around this table. Bread lovingly baked, in our case, by Sharon Toole, and juice so flavorful and sweet. And yet these communion elements find their most authentic value, their most authentic goodness in the fact that we do not eat them all by ourselves. We eat them in the company of other people, some of whom we know as intimately as we know our own mothers, but others of whom we have never even met. Sí, es bueno comer pan y jugo de uva. Nosotros queremos comer comida como esto. Pero yo pienso que hay un mensaje un poquito diferente. Porque la alegría de la niña no fue solamente una alegría acerca del sabor de este alimento. La alegría de la niña fue una alegría porque ella fue en la compañía de su madre y también de toda la congregación. Y esto es lo que más importante en este cuento. Esto es importante porque nosotros tenemos que comer en la compañía de otras personas. Y este es el mensaje más importante de la comunión. El valor de los elementos de la comunión se encuentra en el hecho de que nosotros compartimos el pan y la copa. Nosotros no comemos el pan y la copa solos. We are bound together as a community, not by our common delight in bread and grape juice, but by the fact that to one extent or another we are all engaged in the common quest to know God and to follow the way of Jesus. We are here, brothers and sisters, because the Spirit of God has brought us here to be a single body, focused on the mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That shared quest, that common mission, these are the realities that make our own participation in communion so utterly special and meaningful. In fact, these are the primary reasons why we celebrate communion at all, aren't they? The sacrament begins and ends with the recognition and the affirmation of who and what we are called to be at the most fundamental level of our existence. We are not a loose confederacy of autonomous individuals, each of whom is pursuing his or her own selfish goals and dreams and doesn't care about the people sitting around them. We are the people of God working together as a single body to live out and to share the good news of God's love and grace with the world. And this is what makes the bread and the grape juice so tasty. This is what makes the bread and the grape juice so good. Nosotros somos unidos porque nosotros somos seguidores de Jesucristo, que quieren conocer a Dios y que quieren seguir a Jesucristo. Nosotros estamos aquí porque el Espíritu de Dios nos ha llegado aquí para ser un cuerpo solo que enfoca en la misión de hacer discípulos de Jesucristo para la transformación del mundo. Nosotros somos personas que participan en la comunión porque nosotros somos parte de la misión de Dios. De hecho, estas son las razones por que nosotros tomamos la comunión. Nosotros somos llamados a ser en nuestros propios seres personas que hacen lo que Dios quiere, personas que aman el uno al otro. No somos solamente individuos que persiguen nuestras metas, nuestras propias metas, pero nosotros tenemos la meta de anunciar al mundo la buena noticia del amor y la gracia de Dios para el mundo. Este es lo que da el sabor a nuestra comunión. The Apostle Paul, in the 11th chapter of his first letter to the church in Corinth, writes these words about how we celebrate the sacrament of communion. Whoever therefore eats the bread or drinks the cup of the sovereign in an unworthy manner will be answerable for the body and blood of the sovereign. Examine yourselves, and only then eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For all who eat and drink without discerning the body, eat and drink judgment against themselves. En español. Por lo tanto, cualquiera que coma el pan o beba de la copa del Señor de manera indigna, será culpable de pecar contra el cuerpo y la sangre del Señor. Así que cada uno debe examinarse a sí mismo antes de comer el pan y beber la copa. Porque el que come y bebe sin discernir el cuerpo come y bebe su propia condena. These are hard words. Estas son palabras duras. In spite of what has sometimes been taught, this passage is not about the meaning and status of the communion bread and wine. Paul is not concerned here about whether the bread becomes Jesus' actual body or the wine becomes Jesus' actual blood. That all is irrelevant in spite of the fact that much blood has been spilt over that issue. When Paul exhorts us to discern the body, he is urging us to consider the community that gathers around the communion table. We together are the body of Christ, and not just us alone, but all those around the world of many different denominations, nationalities, races, language groups, and lifestyles who come together to share in this sacred meal. If we cannot discern the fundamental unity that binds us to each other across our differences, then we are partaking of the communion in an unworthy manner, and we are eating and drinking judgment against ourselves. That's Paul's message to us. Paul wants us to understand that what is most important around here is the relationships that we have and the ways that we live with each other in the world. Because if we cannot reconcile with each other, how can we bring reconciliation to the world in which we live? You understand what I'm saying? If we cannot reconcile within our own body, if we cannot forgive one another, then how will the world ever learn how to reconcile and forgive? Our job, our place as the people of God, is to begin to create a different kind of community here among us, a kind of community that does not share in the fear and the hatred and the anger that divides our world, but rather a community that deals in healthy ways with the issues that divide us, the things that make us mad at each other. We are called to be a kind of community that refuses to allow itself to be broken apart by petty conflicts. We are a community of people that is called to let love transcend everything that we do. So that even when someone has harmed us, we still hold open the possibility of a reconciliation that will allow us to love one another and to give an example to the world of what is possible. And if we can begin to reconcile in communities like this one around the world, then the possibility exists that nations can also begin to reconcile. The possibility also exists that we can begin to find other ways than wars to settle our disputes. The possibility exists that God's world might actually be transformed. That's why World Communion Sunday is so important. It's not just so that we can eat wonderful bread with spices from all around the world, because I know Sharon used spices from all around the world to make the bread today. Just so that we can, in a romantic way, remember that there are African Christians and Asian Christians and European Christians and Christians who are Native Americans and Christians from every island in the sea who are sharing together with us in communion today. Oh, that's wonderful. But you know what every single one of us is doing is creating a community of reconciliation right there in that place and in that time where they live. We are, by the very act of joining together in communion, helping to build God's kingdom of love and peace in our world. Nosotros participamos en esta comunión porque nosotros queremos reconciliar nosotros mismos, el uno con el otro. Nosotros queremos perdonar a las otras personas en esta comunidad. Pero si nosotros podemos reconciliarnos en esta comunidad, la posibilidad existe que si esta comunidad y otra comunidad y otra comunidad y otra comunidad y otra comunidad aprenden cómo reconciliar, pues la reconciliación es posible por todo el mundo, por todo el mundo. Y nosotros no tenemos que resolver nuestros conflictos por medio de guerras. Nosotros podemos, por medio de esta comunión, participar en la creación del reino de Dios de amor y de paz. Esta comunión es muy importante. This communion is very important. Friends, don't come to communion today thinking that it's just some kind of a sweet little ritual we perform in. It's not what it's about. Come to communion knowing that when you come, you are helping to make this world new. You are sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and the love of God with all the world. You are sharing it with Christians around this world who are doing the very same thing on this day. Thanks be to God. Amen.